Reading from Exodus 34. And the Lord said to Moses, "Cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and I will write on these tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke." The 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, housed in the golden ark and stored in the most holy portion of the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, was the focal presence of the Lord for the ancient Israelites. Something of this exists today in the cathedral. The focus of our service is a copy of the Word on a golden altar in the inmost part of the chancel. That golden ark with the 10 Commandments brought about great miracles. But Exodus records that these stone tablets in the ark were not the ones that the Lord had originally given to Moses. The first set of stone tablets were broken by Moses when he saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf. 40 days earlier, the Israelites had heard God speak the words of the 10 Commandments and then had twice solemnly sworn, "All the words which the Lord has said, we will do." But then the Israelites had disobeyed the primary commandment not to worship other gods. The first set of stone tablets were cut out by God and written on by God. These were destroyed. The second set of tablets were cut out by Moses before he returned to Mount Sinai for God to once again write the 10 Commandments on them. This change, as indicated in today's lesson from the Arcana Celestia, reflects a fundamental change in the way the Old Testament presents the Lord, the Israelites, and what the Lord expected of them. We read, "The secret reflected in this story is that the literal sense of the word would have been different if the word had been written among a different people, or if the character of the Israelite people had not been such as it was." One of the powerful ideas for the new church is that there is an inner or spiritual meaning in the Old and New Testament. Like a parable that describes things of this world, but teaches a higher spiritual idea within its words, all the inspired books of the Old and New Testament, including the parts that describe genuine history, contain hidden wisdom from the Lord. We're encouraged to read the Word daily. Reading 2 or 3 chapters a day, a person can read all the inspired books of the Old and New Testament in a single year. Yet, at times, what one finds in those pages is troubling. A thoughtful reader of the Old Testament can react with discomfort to many of the events that are described there, and especially to some of the words that are attributed to God. The stories have numerous examples of violence perpetrated against the enemies of the Israelites, and even on the Israelites themselves. Sometimes this violence is presented as being guided by divine command, and sometimes is presented as being from the Lord himself. Sadly, some people have been taught a view of God that explicitly presents him as having an angry, condemning perspective on human beings. A passage in the True Christian Religion first describes how too often the idea of an angry, condemning God is taught as the truth. And then it states, everyone with decent reasoning, enlightened by the word, can see that God is compassion and mercy itself. He is absolute love and absolute goodness. These qualities are his essence. It's a contradiction to say that compassion itself or absolute goodness could look at the human race with anger and lock us all into damnation and still keep its divine essence. Attitudes and actions of that kind belong to a wicked person, not a virtuous one. They belong to a spirit of hell, not an angel of heaven. It is horrendous to attribute them to God. Another aspect of the Old Testament that can be troubling is that God seems to be figuring things out as they unfold and sometimes changing his mind, as reflected in the lesson from Exodus today. He's described as being sad about how something has turned out and apparently wishing he had done something different previously, or repenting of his choices. The true nature of things is described in the following passage. The Lord is referred to as repenting and grieving in heart, however, because all human mercy seems to involve those feelings. Consequently, as is the case many times elsewhere in the Word, the manner of speaking here is in accordance with the outward appearance. Nobody can know what God's mercy is, for it infinitely transcends all human understanding. But one can know what human mercy is. It's repenting and grieving. And unless a person grasps the idea of mercy from some different from feeling whose nature he knows, he can have no possible conception of it, and so cannot learn anything about it. This is the reason why human characteristics are frequently attributed to Jehovah or the Lord. For example, or Jehovah the Lord punishes, leads into temptation, destroys, and burns with anger, when in fact he never punishes anybody, never leads anybody into temptation, never destroys anybody, and never burns with anger. So, why does the Old Testament exist as it does? One part of the answer provided for the new church has to do with the vital connection that needs to exist between angels in heaven and human beings in this world. This vital connection is provided by a church existing in this world, formed of human beings who've been taught by the Lord and are following what they've been taught. Even if this group of human beings is small, it still preserves the possibility of spiritual life for everyone else in the globe. Heavenly Doctrine describes a series of churches that existed starting with the golden age of love and wisdom, represented by the stories of Adam and Eve, then descending to a church whose establishment is reflected in the story of Noah and the flood, and continuing with 3 following churches. The vast majority of the Old Testament was revealed during a time when a genuine church, founded on love and wisdom, could not exist. So, vitally important there be a church. It should be a church of people that are striving to learn from the Lord and live good lives. But a time happened when such a church was impossible. We're taught in the Arcana Celestia, the Lord's providence in a miraculous manner enabled a representative of a church to exist, for the reason that some kind of communication might be established between heaven and mankind through what was a semblance of the church. For without any communication of heaven with mankind by means of some kind of church, the human race would perish. The representative of a church described in much of the Old Testament is not a genuine church, but rather a group of people who acted in ways that connected them with heaven. Although the people had nothing of love and genuine faith within their worship, their external obedience allowed for a miraculous connection. This is described in the following words. The communication of angels in heaven by means of representatives was effected at that time in the following way. People's outward worship was conveyed to angelic spirits who are simple and give no thought to inward values, though they themselves nevertheless are inwardly good. These simple angelic spirits pay no attention at all to what a person is inwardly, only to what is visible outwardly. And if this is seen by them to be holy, they think that what is inward is so too. The more internal angels of heaven saw in these spirits the realities that were being represented, consequently the corresponding heavenly and divine values. For they could reside with these spirits and see those values, but not with human beings except through these spirits. Angels dwell with people in their inward values, but when no inward values are there, they dwell in the interior of simple spirits. For the wisdom of angels extends only to spiritual and heavenly values, which are the inward realities of representatives. So what's this mean? It means that when an ancient Israelite was offering the sacrifice of a lamb, it was just an external action. There was nothing behind it other than God said I should do this. And yet these simple angels looked at that and thought, this is a reflection of an innocent turning to the Lord. They didn't see what was inside the ancient Israelite, who didn't have any of that in his heart. But because the simple angels saw that, the higher angels could look at what was within the simple angels and be connected. So, it was crucial that the ancient Israelites sacrificed in precisely correct ways. It was crucial that they followed the ritual laws of Exodus and Leviticus. The survival of the human race back then depended on it. We would not be alive today if a representative of a church had not been provided by the Lord. But to accomplish this external obedience, the Lord had to present himself in certain ways to the Israelites. He had to provide external rewards for obedience and consequences, some quite terrible, for disobedience. This is described in the following teaching for the new church. In order, therefore, that a representative of the church might come into existence among the children of Israel, they were provided through plainly visible revelation with such prescribed rules and such laws as would be entirely representative. Therefore, as long as they kept to them and strictly complied with them, these people were able to perform a representative role. But when they deviated from them into the prescribed rules and laws of other nations, and in particular to the worship of another god, they deprived themselves of their ability to play that representative role. For this reason, they were coerced by external means, which were captivities, calamities, threats, miracles, into obeying laws and prescribed rules that were truly representative, not by internal means, as those people are whose external worship as internal within it. The Lord maintained the crucial connection between heaven and earth at this time by what might be called the government of hell. In this setting, there was no love, no living concern for the welfare of others, no genuine faith even in a rudimentary form. It's a very perverse state. And consequently, the way the Lord appears to this state of mind is far from what he is in himself. If you read the Old Testament without realizing what the Lord was trying to do to preserve all people, you end up with some very serious misunderstandings of his priorities and his true nature. And what's very important for us is to know that mere external behavior will not give us a connection with heaven. What's that mean? You could have somebody who goes to church basically every Sunday of their life, and they get to the next life and say, "Aren't I ready for heaven?" And the angels would say, "No, you didn't really care about what the Lord wanted you to live." You could have somebody even who reads the Word every day, but if all it produced was facts in their memory, that would not prepare them for heavenly life. So, a point about reading the Word. As you read the Word and run into troubling ideas or images, remember that there's an inner or spiritual meaning contained within those words. Everything seen by the angels within those stories reflects the Lord's loving and wise care for all. It reflects the Lord's desire to lead us away from qualities and choices that would harm others and us. It reflects the Lord's protection of good people from those who seek evil things for them. There are ways in which the Old Testament is a perfect revelation. The internal or spiritual sense is perfectly represented in its tiniest details. It was exactly what the Lord needed to reveal to establish a connection between heaven and earth that was vital for the entire human race in the centuries prior to the Lord's advent. But as was stated in one of the lessons, the literal sense of the word would have been different if the word had been written among another people. This is the secret within the story of the Ten Commandments being written twice. The second time, the tables of stone were provided by Moses. The Lord was willing to work within a disorderly time and with people whose hearts and minds and lives were far from what he would wish for us to accomplish his goal of love. The Old Testament was given to people who needed external rewards and punishments. It does not directly reflect the Lord's love in many places, and too often it reflects the government of hell. As you read, focus on how often the Lord reminds the people that the problems are a consequence of their choices. And if they return to worshiping the Lord and following his commandments, they'll be blessed. This is a genuine truth. When you read of the battles and enemies of the children of Israel, try to remember that a key focus of the inner or spiritual sense is our own spiritual battles. The battles reflect how the Lord can lead us to fight against evil loves and false ideas that would harm us and others. When unrelenting destruction of all human beings in a city is being spoken of, we can remember that the whole interconnected families of evil loves with their false ideas exist in our minds. Each one of these evil loves and false ideas, from the greatest to the least, represents a spiritual danger to us and our ability to be useful. The Lord wants us to seek his help to remove their influence from our minds. The Lord encourages us to read His Word. Through our reverent reading, we can help provide a foundation for the angels. If we're reading with an effort to recognize what the Lord wants for our spiritual lives, and we use this to make better decisions and to fight our spiritual enemies, the Lord will lead us from natural life to spiritual life. He will lead us to a heavenly home. It's not always easy to see the Lord's loving and wise presence in the stories of the Old Testament, but let us sincerely believe it's always there. For those of us who read the Word reverently and try to follow what they learn, in the next life, the inner meaning of these stories will be given to us in clarity and detail, far beyond what we can possibly know in this world. Then we will clearly see the truth that every tiniest detail of the internal meaning of the Old Testament presents a perfectly loving and wise God who's constantly working within our lives to lead us to a better, more useful, and happier life. Amen.